Module 4. How does mental health relate to diversity and inclusion? Typically, when we think of diversity and inclusion, we tend to think of legally protected factors like gender and race, for example. Mental health often does not come to mind. But what we know is that mental health and diversity and inclusion are closely connected. Mental health exists on a spectrum and is something that we all have. Mental health conditions can be experienced by any of us, no matter our background or social context. However, the risks of developing a mental health condition are not equally distributed. Certain groups of people are more prone to experiencing mental health conditions when compared to others. For example, people from ethnic minority groups who are exposed to social exclusion and discrimination based on their gender, race, or sexual orientation are at a greater risk of developing a mental health condition. There's also research evidence to suggest that there's a higher rate of psychosis amongst immigrants. LGBTQ+ people are also at greater risk of experiencing depression when compared to the national United Kingdom average, for example. Cultural context can also be a factor that impacts the way in which communities talk about mental health and how members of a community access resources and services available to them. Often employees from ethnic minorities can be subject to microaggressions, unconscious bias, and other stresses that might impact their mental health and psychological safety in a working environment. It is important to recognise that all types of diversity impacts a person's identity and experience of mental health. When an employee is experiencing a mental health condition, organisational strategies should ensure that there's a focus on inclusivity for these individuals. What I mean by this is that initiatives which serve to support diversity and inclusion should also promote mental health and vice versa. It is essential that organisations provide the necessary resources that employees need to support their mental health so that everyone has the equal opportunity to access help. This might include appropriate counselling services, employee support groups, or screening tools. These should be considered important parts of diversity and inclusion strategies and even prioritised within an organisation, as the statistics suggest that 1 in 4 of us will experience a mental health condition at some point in our life. Stigmatising people that may have mental health conditions can give rise to unfair treatment and discrimination. Therefore, it only makes sense that we start opening up conversations around how we can extend more compassion to people experiencing mental health problems so that they do indeed feel included in the workplace. Here are some practical steps that you can take to start working towards building a more inclusive workplace environment where employees with a mental health condition feel valued and supported. You can offer various technological interventions, such as apps, that provide the support individuals need to cope with day-to-day stresses. This might assist with skills to help keep their tasks in order so that they can be completed on time. Another useful tip is to include the group concerned to problem solve when trying to implement reasonable adjustments. Inclusion in decision-making is not just about merely being present, it's also about feeling like you can participate in the conversation and have your voice heard. Adjusting our language when we speak about mental health conditions is another way to create a more inclusive environment. Remember that words have power, and there are certain words that can really fuel the stigma around mental health, regardless of an individual's intentions. Try not to use inaccurate language that can minimize and sometimes trivialize actual mental health illnesses, such as describing unpredictable weather as bipolar. Don't dismiss someone else's struggles if they open up to you. Rather, try and use supportive language, such as "how can I help?" to create an environment where they feel included and not stigmatized. Remember that if you are a manager, your responsibility is not to try and provide treatment yourself, but to rather create an environment so that open conversations can occur. This way, you'll be able to signpost a colleague to the most appropriate support options.